right, welcome back, folks, to our special segment. This segment is going to be very lively. It's now I'm biased here. Uh, Not only do we get to talk about Texas politics, but we get to do so with arguably the brightest political mind to ever come out of the Lone Star State, Matt Angle. But before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to follow us on everywhere you get your podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Amazon, you name it, we're everywhere. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube as well. So before I get started, Matt, let me walk our audience through your background. I think anyone who's ever worked in politics, especially in Texas, probably knows your name. But it's been now almost 20 years since you started the Lone Star Project, and I can think of any number of outfits that have gone into the state, set up shop, and after a cycle they just leave and never to return. So welcome to our TargetSmart podcast, Matt. We're gonna walk our audience again through the political landscape and a host of other things. But I always like to get started by asking the first question of how you got started in politics and what was your first foray into the arena. For those of you who don't know, Matt gave me my first political break back when I was a youngster knocking on doors. And what was it then, Matt? It was the 5th congressional district. Or the 12th, I forget.
It was the 5th at that point. Yep. And although the numbers, have changed a couple of times since then, Albert.
Yeah, I think if there was ever a gerrymandered state, Texas would easily take the title as the most gerrymandered state in the country. But again, Matt, you started Lone Star Project again some 20 years ago, and you want to walk our audience through how you. I know that the Lone Star Project doesn't define you entirely. You were a chief of staff to Martin Frost for many years, but also you've moved things around the state politically for as long as I can remember. So walk our audience through how you got involved in politics and what was it that made it become your everyday life.
Well, Albert, I first of all, thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate all the great work that you've done. And let me tell you that I've been fortunate enough to work with some very talented people over the years. And Albert, from the very first day that we met him and knew him and he started work, we knew that you had bigger and better and great things ahead. And so you've actually proved us right on that. So I appreciate the help that you've given to me along the way. I got involved in politics really in an unusual way at one level, in that I grew up in Haltom City, which is a suburb of Fort Worth. It's a middle class, working class, small suburb. I was working my way through the University of Texas at Arlington as a carpet installer, and I was fortunate in that one of my instructors realized that I was having to work and having a hard time getting to some classes, and he said, "Look, if you'll go help this guy and this new member of Congress named Martin Frost, I'll give you credit for this entire class." And I thought that was a pretty good deal, and so but a very fortunate deal for me, because Martin Frost at that point was in his 3rd term in Congress, but he was ambitious in the right ways. He wasn't so much personally ambitious. He knew that in order to be successful, he needed to be in the majority in the House, and that Texas needed to continue to elect Democrats. And he saw ahead of time, ahead of many others, the demographic changes that were coming to Texas. And so he was very aggressive in his campaign, even though for the next 3 cycles, even when he didn't have races, he would put together a full-blown campaign operation. I got to be involved in that. He kept me on in the non-political cycles as a staff person. So I got to learn a lot about what a member of Congress does, particularly at the state level. And then got a chance to go to D.C. and become his chief of staff. And I was his chief of staff for about 16 years. During that period of time, I served as for 2 cycles as executive director of the DCCC. and for 2 cycles as executive director of the House Democratic Caucus. And the great thing is, unlike many other members, allowed me to continue to be somebody deeply engaged in the politics of the House generally, and the politics of Texas. I fell in love with Texas politics and the difficulty of it, the diversity of the state, the fact that you did have a dominant Republican Party that was funded, and that there was a crying need for Democratic leadership. That played out in redistricting, and that if some people will remember the villainous Tom DeLay, who was a Republican from Texas. And if you're really looking for the time in which the page turned, that Republicans got complete control in Texas, it was when Tom DeLay was able to pass a highly discriminatory gerrymander of the congressional districts, in which there was packing of minority voters across the state and cracking where you couldn't pack minority voters. And that 2003 redistricting by Tom DeLay really served as the template for redistricting across the South in 2011. And so if you're really wondering kind of who was the godfather of discriminatory political gerrymandering, using race as a proxy for party in political gerrymandering, it was Tom DeLay. It cost Martin Frost his seat. His seat was erased. He couldn't survive that. But I decided that I wasn't going to let Tom DeLay and that effort erase what I thought needed to be done in Texas. So this was right after 2003. I founded the Lone Star Project. But to be always very pragmatic, to look at the ground as it existed, and try to figure out how to win rather than just how to make an argument. Democrats in Texas, we win a lot of arguments. We win most of the arguments. We just don't win enough races. Yeah. And so I focused on a lot of district level, down ballot races, particularly in county level races. And that's really kind of what I've done and stayed at. And while a lot of people say that, gosh, there's a lot of groups that come into Texas and they try real hard and then they leave. Well, that's because they come in kind of not understanding the state very well. They come in there with their eyes bright and thinking that they're going to register 500,000 people and turn out 250,000 of them. And they don't realize that in Texas, that's about $100 million project. And so when they realize they can't do it with the 5 million they bring in, they leave. What I've tried to do is be very pragmatic and look at places where the counties are available to us, and where state house and state senate districts evolve and change over the decade, and we can win them with the idea of winning races, not getting involved in races that are tilting at windmills, but to run the races that can be pragmatically run. And during it all, continue to deliver a message that one-party Republican control in Texas has failed. It's failed the state, and that mainstream, fair-minded voters, whatever they think of as their party, don't have to accept it. So that's more of a long-winded answer than maybe you wanted, Albert. But it's really, getting up and getting into the fight in Texas is really, really hard, but it's really, really important, and it's what drives me still.
Yeah, well, luckily for you, I think it's starting to get a little bit, or at least relatively, less expensive to play in Texas, given all the advantages that we now have over digital and how we can, make our ad buys more targeted, and to your point, be more pragmatic about it. Do you see? I have to believe that, and this is just following trends. Anybody can go online and look at the races for president, and look at how Joe Biden got within 3.5 points in 2020. No one had gotten that close. Right, I went back and checked since Jimmy Carter, actually, when he got elected in '76. So it's been a minute, been a while. Do you? I mean, we have competitive Senate race, right? No one can argue that that race is not competitive. In a presidential year, what are your thoughts? What would you be looking for as we close in on the final stretch, looking at Texas, and what would give you reason to call up Julie Chavez over at the Harris campaign and say, hey, dump your money in Houston right now on the turnout operation. We can win this thing.
Let me tell you what three dynamics are going on in Texas. And the question is, will they reach critical mass in this election? Mm-hmm. One is the urbanization of the state. That the population has exploded in Texas. It's got 30 million people in it. And that growth is all concentrated in the big urban areas. In the Houston, Harris County area, Harris County alone has 4.7 million people in it. If it were a state, it would be bigger than 24 other states. Similarly, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Dallas and Tarrant County, which is where the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth are, they also together are a little over 4.7 million people. And then you've got Austin and San Antonio. All of those places just have exploded with growth. And that growth has been driven by three parts of the population: huge increases in the Latino population, significant increase in the Black population. Texas has more Black residents than any state in the country. Even though it makes up about 13% of the citizen age vote population in terms of raw numbers, it's more than any other place. And then also the Anglo growth in those urban areas is more fair-minded, more reasonable, not people who are just culturally automatically Republican. And so the question is whether or not that demographic will start to play out even more in politics. Ted Cruz saved himself in 2018 by getting a disproportionate turnout in the rural parts of Texas. And while Beto ran an aggressive campaign, he really didn't have as much organization as people think in the urban areas. I think that Colin Allred and others are doing a little bit better job of that. So you've got that going on. Colin Allred is running a smarter campaign, frankly, from the standpoint of not being as ideological. It's not that you have to be Republican light, but you need to see the world from the middle out in Texas and know that the Democratic coalition that comes together is not just a racial coalition of Blacks, Hispanics, and fair-minded Anglos. It's also a coalition of people who are liberal and then people who are fair-minded and think of themselves as either moderates or even a little bit center right. And that the Republican leadership in Texas has abandoned by going full MAGA. And so Colin has done a good job of making himself available to some of those voters in the middle without alienating voters to the left. And then the final dynamic is pure mechanics on the ground and whether we can get enough real activity on the ground in Texas that is partisan. There's oftentimes, and you mentioned a lot of groups come into Texas and they talk about there being progressive infrastructure and things like that, but they aren't hard and partisan enough. We have to be able to tell people to go in there and vote Democratic for our candidates for these reasons. And if you just say, just turn people out, then there is diversity politically within the Hispanic community in Texas. You've got to give people a real reason to vote for the Democrats. And there's more diversity in the Black community than people think. And within the Anglo community, you got to be able to get at least 1 out of 3 of those votes. And so there has to be smart work on the ground. If you're looking at Texas this time on election day, I'd look at 2 places. First, I'd look at Harris County. In Harris County, if the county-wides of Colin Allred is around 59% of the vote, that's kind of Harris pulling its weight as to what it needs to do for him to win statewide. And then I'd look at Tarrant County, where Fort Worth is. Tarrant County needs to be at about 52.5%, 53%. That's Tarrant County pulling its weight. Frankly, I do a lot of work in Tarrant County. That's where I think if I were calling the Harris campaign and saying where you really need to most efficiently spend your next $1 million or $2 million, I'd say in that North Texas, Tarrant County area. And then I'd go out from there to some of the exurban counties that touch on those counties.
Fascinating. Well, I try to bite. I have to bite my lip a little when I'm having these conversations with people because I get carried away. I was at a big event yesterday. Everyone was asking me, "So are those Texas numbers real?" So just follow the trend line. Of course it is.
Yeah.
We've been working our way. Say we, Matt Angle and company, have been steadily chugging along.
It's a heavy lift. Make no mistake. It's a heavy lift. And if you're the Senate committee, I mean, this is the thing in Texas. If the Senate committee, you got to decide, okay, Texas is a giant state; it's very expensive. Are we going to put something in Texas that we don't hold, or try to do something that we do hold? And so I understand. That's why I tell people in Texas, quit looking for the national party to bail you out. We got to save ourselves.
There's no cavalry coming ever. So yesterday I ran into a number of Texans. I came into Washington for an event, and I couldn't help but think of all the talent that has left, myself not included, that has left the state to work on presidential races or party committees. And I thought to myself, man, at some point, some of you have to go back and either run for office or help row the boat, because we're getting there. You have a bird's eye view of all the talent, Matt. Who would you say are some of the rising stars? Whether they're in the legislature, is it a mayor? Everyone always asks me, so when's the next Latino Obama? I'm like, that person is probably in some school board right now, for all I know. But you want to share your thoughts on folks to keep an eye on? I think we have a bench.
Yeah, there's definitely a bench in Texas, and I'm also frustrated by the number of operatives who kind of earn their spurs in Texas and then actually earn their living in other places later on. And but part of that is, again, the kind of this misunderstanding. A lot of times people, they want to come in and they want to fund infrastructure. Well, a lot of times that the people that they train end up leaving and not being infrastructure. So the key in Texas is actually win races and have office holders. That's how you build real infrastructure, is to hold office. And but we are, I think, blessed with more and more what I would call rising stars at every level. Within the congressional delegation, Lizzie Fletcher, member of Congress in the Houston area, she right now, she could have run for the Senate as well as Colin. Absolutely somebody who's capable of running and winning statewide. There's also a couple of county officials in the Harris County. The guy that was the city comptroller is a young guy named Chris Hollins, extraordinarily talented with real potential. Another young African-American who is the county attorney in Harris County, a young guy named Chris Hollins, also very good. And then looking at the congressional delegation, also, you've got Veronica Escobar out of El Paso.
I like her.
Absolutely talented and capable, and would be an extraordinary statewide candidate. You've got some others that may or may not see their future as running statewide, but I think could emerge as real leaders within the congressional delegation. Mark Vesey has started to really rack up some seniority and do good work out of Fort Worth. He's African American who represents a district that's majority Latino, and has been a real champion on things like voting rights, voter ID, things like that. There's a young Hispanic progressive out of Austin named Greg Casar, extraordinarily talented, and I could see him become a real progressive force within Congress. Jasmine Crockett, African-American woman out of Dallas, who has become just an outstanding spokesperson for Democrats nationally. And I assume as she gets a little bit more seniority, she'll become more of an organizational politician, but nobody's delivering message more effectively than she is. And then there's a newcomer to the congressional delegation, the woman that's going to take Colin Allred's place in Congress, a woman named Julie Johnson, who's an LGBTQ candidate and who is smart as can be and tough as shoe leather. And so that's somebody that I see. And I could go on from there. There's some state house members. Gina Hinojosa, who is in Austin, young Latina who I could see if Lloyd Doggett leaves Congress, I could see her take his place. Another person who could run for that seat is a young progressive named James Tallarico, who is an evangelical Christian and does such a great job of talking about Christian values from a democratic perspective. And then there's another person who he wouldn't like me calling him a rising star because he's almost as old as I am, but he's somebody that I could see if Henry Cuellar there on the border, if he ends up for whatever reason not being in Congress, whether it's ethics or other things, there's a state representative named Richard Pena Raymond, who I think if he got himself elected to Congress, he would be a effective and a leader from day one.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Richard in, gosh, probably 20 years now. Come to think of it, maybe this is my cue to call him. So switching gears here a little bit, Matt, we've been at TargetSmart been following all of the latest voter registration trends. It's been extraordinary, to put it mildly. Some of these shifts that we're seeing amongst women, young women, especially Black and Latinas, women, they are just I often say this to folks. I think as men, there is no way that we can begin to understand the pressure points that they're feeling as women, especially if you live in Texas or one of these states where these archaic abortion laws have kicked in, whether it's Georgia, where we've now lost 2 women thanks to Trump. But in Texas, I was digging through some of the numbers, and I don't think we've released our latest data points there yet. But what's happening? They purged like over 1 million voters here recently. And I know some people are deceased or whatever, but am I reading those numbers correctly? What's going on there?
Yeah, they put 1 million people on their purge list and remove them from the rolls. And some of them are legitimate. Some people have died. Some people moved out of the state. Things like that. But what that really is, though, is a gotcha operation. And the way they do that is they send a notice to your house. And if that comes back as undeliverable, they will assume that you are no longer there, and then they immediately unregister you. And of course, we know that disproportionately affects people who move a lot, which disproportionately affects people of color, Black, Latino, and poor Anglos, and students, young people. And so that's what it is. But I will tell you, Albert, it's more than that. It's more than the literal purging of the vote, because those are some things you can mechanically deal with. If somebody goes to vote and they're able to prove their residence, they're going to be able to vote and cure it on the spot. They have to know to do that, and so they create it. So we have to educate people to do that. But more important, what you see with Greg Abbott, particularly the governor, and Ken Paxton, who are just virulently racist and discriminatory. What they want to do is create an atmosphere of confusion and fear around voting. That, well, gosh, maybe I'm not allowed to vote, and if I show up, I might get in trouble, or it's a lot of trouble, or this is so complicated. And again, it's a strategy that they played out for 20 years, and it's the notion that as the Texas population becomes more diverse, becomes browner and less white, that rather than really lifting a finger to try to earn any of those votes, they would rather suppress it across the board. That's a huge challenge for us, but it's also an opportunity, because they basically are saying they don't want any vote other than people who look and sound like they do.
Well, obviously, I enjoy following what's happening in the Latino electorate, not only in Texas, but across the country. And, some of these numbers on Hispanic men, particularly young Hispanic men, are concerning to me. But I don't know what that message is right away that they need to hear. I mean, I point to Project 2025, for example, for people within my own family who recently, I have a cousin, get this, man, she's Linda. She is probably 5 years younger than me, but it took her 23 years to get her green card. And I'll never forget, she'd gotten the notice that, congratulations, your paperwork is now done. And then COVID hit, the pandemic. So they had to cancel her appointment to go before the judge and do all that, do whatever it is you do to get your green card. And then the migrant crisis, happened. You had the influx of people, not only from Venezuela, but other people who were not Mexican, right, coming into town. And there was this hostility that started brewing within my own family towards immigrants. I'm like, oh, do you not remember that was you at one point? But it's taken me actually digging through Project 2025 to find that part where I think it's Stephen Miller is promoting again on Twitter that they have a denaturalization plan in the works that they started, but they're going to use his words, put it into overdrive or something in a second Trump term. But do you see that message penetrating anywhere in Texas? Is that anyone using it?
It's not penetrating. There is an awareness of it, and let me tell you, there's an audience for that, Albert. We did some polling in Harris County and in Tarrant County, and there is softness. There's no question. There's softness among Latino men, particularly those who have been in the country for a while. There's some things that are just kind of regular that you would expect, and that is that they're aspirational. They don't necessarily want to be talked to as poor people and as people who are struggling. They want to be talked to about people who are looking for opportunity and people who are succeeding in taking care of their family. So I think we need to take care of that. But there is also a sense that they kind of, other people are getting it easier who came in after them. And that resentment. And I think in Texas, you got two things. You've got kind of a desire to assimilate just generally, and then you've got this desire to assimilate as a Texan and to really become a Texan. And so I think we really need to talk to just the aggressive and just hostile attitude of state leadership and Project 25 to, and when we say denaturalize, basically, if your parents weren't citizens, you're not a citizen, no matter whether you were born there. That point of view is anti-American, anti-Texan, and it is just a direct threat to people who right now don't realize what a danger a Republican vote is. It goes to a resource problem that we always have in Texas, is that what's the best use of the next available dollar? And is that best use to go and shore up that vote? I definitely think it is in places where we are competitive or that we absolutely have to hit margins along the border and in these urban areas.
So along those lines, Matt, but you mentioned the various media markets. I think our audience would be shocked to learn at the number of media markets that we have. I started counting them the other day. You got Dallas, Fort Worth, you got Houston, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso, which, that can be New Mexico too, for all I know. But can you enlighten us?
You've got 12 media markets that would be seen as significant, and most states have one or two. And of course, between Dallas and Houston, each of those media markets rival Los Angeles in terms of the cost of political communication. And when it gets to what I tell people, that it's not that national political operatives are stupid or that they can't see what's going on in Texas. They also that they can do the math and they know what it costs. And so we have to be realistic about that. And that's why I always try to make sure that our efforts are the size to be in the fight we're in. That's why to fight at a county level or do those types of things. Now, this is a year in which I think a statewide race in Texas is justified.
We can't talk about Texas without talking about Greg Abbott and his obsession with school vouchers. And I don't know about Texas, Matt, but the average cost of private education, at least where I live, is about $35,000 a year per student. Now, these vouchers that Abbott wants to give out are what, under 10,000? That really,
8,000 right now.
8,000.
8,000.
But who does that benefit?
Well, it benefits Greg Abbott and his friends. Greg Abbott's been governor of Texas for 10 years. Before then, he spent over 10 years as Attorney General of Texas. He never really cared that much about vouchers. He cares now because he's got one donor out of Pennsylvania who's basically a corporate private school entrepreneur who became a billionaire who gave him $10 million. There are a couple of West Texas oil billionaires who fund operations in the millions and millions of dollars. So it's not very complicated, and you have to remember that with Greg Abbott. It's kind of his genius in that he is very straightforward, harshly partisan, and he's everything is a transaction, and they are hell bent to ram vouchers down Texans' throats. The downside is that it is a horrible blow to public schools in Texas if they do it. The upside is, though, that it is not something that the majority of Texans want. And so it's on us to get a political result as a result of this just attack on Texas public education.
Yeah, I mean, I see the reports come out of Arizona where they now have a $1.5 billion budget deficit as a result of these school vouchers that they introduce. And it's happening in other states. I imagine Iowa's not far behind, but anywhere where these vouchers have become, I guess, the norm, a year or two later, it's like their states going broke again.
Well, I have a prediction too, Albert, in that if they land on 8,000 as the amount, or let's say they go to 10,000 as the amount, as you said, that's less than a third of what it really costs to get a good public education. I think you're going to see springing up around Texas is a bunch of private schools that suddenly just magically have $8,000 a year tuitions or $10,000 a year tuitions, which will be subpar. They're going to drain entirely out of regular public schools, making them worse. But then you're going to have a whole generation of Texans who are getting subpar educations and so being taught by basically 7-Eleven corner store schools.
Yeah, I don't think those schools are going to pop up in the north side of Fort Worth either.
That's exactly.
But that's a whole other conversation. This morning I woke up to an ad, switching gears here again, but still talking about Texas, Matt. I woke up to an ad that the Harris Walls campaign put out using the sad and one could argue just sick case that happened with this young girl in Kentucky. You may remember her from Governor Beshear's reelection campaign, where she talked about her experience of having to undergo abortion care because of a abusive stepfather. I think Texas is kind of like ground zero, much like Georgia is for the abortion debate, where women are. It's happening. They're being forced to go out to a parking lot. I know it sounds graphic and awful, but again, this is one of those cases where you and I can't really fully relate. I mean, the closest I can think of a situation that might involve me would be going to the ER and I've got chest pains and the doctor telling me, hey, we'll go out to the parking lot. If we think you're having a heart attack, I'll get this judge to give me the okay to treat you. But even that doesn't even come close to what these women are having to experience. Do they now believe it? Because I think what happened with the Dobbs decision, that it took a while for it to marinate, right? It took a while for Texans to actually start seeing these awful stories evolve, if you will.
It's our most powerful message, Albert. There's no question about it. And I've looked at this, a dozen state house polls. I've looked at 3 big county level polls, and it's not just with women. Frankly, it is with men who. I mean, it affects fathers and brothers and sons as well. And it's not, in my view, it's not really whether or not men can relate to what the woman is going through. They can relate to the prospects of an 11-year-old daughter being raped and becoming pregnant and having her childhood robbed because she's forced to go through childbirth, or having the horror of a complicated miscarriage in which not only are they losing a child that they wanted and their wife wanted, but run the prospects of losing their wife. And that's playing out in real time. It's happening to real people. I think for the first time in Texas, it's something that the legislature and the governor has done that isn't seen as, well, it's targeting poor people or people not like me, and so I feel bad about it, but it won't affect me. This is a problem I had a colleague say that people can't buy their way out of if it happens to them. And so you will see smart campaigns in Texas using that no matter what level they're running at on the ballot.
Yeah, I mean, what happened to us, Matt? I think you and I both remember the Ann Richards, Clayton Williams debacle, where he made a joke referencing rape. Yep. And that was a bridge too far for most Texans, and we ended up with Ann Richards, who, was a force, obviously. But how do we get there? How do we get to where we are now? To where we were back then? I don't know. I mean,
I don't know the answer to that either, other than, we do have to realize that one party decided to give up on truth and facts as a baseline to work from. And you can blame Donald Trump, but I can tell you, as somebody who's done work in Texas, this was happening before there was Donald Trump. It was happening going all the way back to Tom DeLay, when you had one party that decided that their path to holding on to power was to basically gaslight the public and try to activate some of the worst impulses of people in our culture.
Yeah, I think you covered this, which was going to be my next question, Matt. But which issue do you think is going to dominate the political landscape in Texas, if that is at all possible? Because I still believe that it is South Texas is, you may as well call it a different country, because it is the disparities in just basic income, the income inequality, compared to Austin or North Texas. Which issue do you think is going to dominate the landscape in November, if that's possible? Do you think it's going to be abortion rights?
In places like, I think in places like the border, in places that are more marginal, I still think that the attack on persons' ability to control their own body is important, but it has to be part of a bigger message, and that is taking away your opportunity to succeed, to deny people the ability to have a family and to take care of it, and to really go to people's struggle and their desire to obtain and stay in a home. I think there needs to be an important economic layer to that doesn't go to we're helping poor people. It goes to we want you to have the opportunity to succeed, and for you to realize the fruits of your labor. And I think sometimes Democrats miss that. Frankly, I think that's one of the things that groups coming from outside Texas often miss. They miss the ambition. They miss the desire to succeed that sits in Texans, even of meager means, whether they're Black, Hispanic, or Anglo. And you've really got to talk to that aspiration.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, because I don't like the winters up here in the Northeast, especially around January, February. And, I live on a farm, and I don't have a choice but to get up and sometimes break ice. But that pales in comparison to what Texans experienced a couple of years ago, when you guys had that massive power outage and people were throwing furniture into their fireplaces to keep the house warm. Do you think that enough voters still remember Ted Cruz hopping on a plane to Cancun? I know there's some political ads out there aimed at him. But what's your sense on that?
Oh, I don't think
the power grid is still kind of shaky.
If you ask people one thing about Ted Cruz, that's what we're going to see. Is he the guy who went to Cancun? Is he the guy who bailed out during the winter storm? And it really throws into relief his character and really his effectiveness, in that I mean, Ted Cruz has been in the Senate now since 2012, and no Texan can point to a single thing he's done for them. And so Ted Cruz, he's extraordinary in some levels in that he's probably the least liked successful politician I've ever been around.
That's a pretty good way of putting it.
I mentioned that poll in Tarrant County. In the head-to-head, Colin Allred was just a point up on Cruz, but that's good. He was a point up. But Collins, his positive to negative was 20 points to the positive. Ted's positive to negative was 40 points to the negative.
Good grief.
And so it tells you that the power of partisanship, but it also shows a real weakness and vulnerability because, Ted Cruz, you can't scrub the stink off that skunk. People don't like him. They're not going to start liking him. And that's why I think you're going to see it's already started. He will go slash and burn negative. You won't see a positive communication from Ted Cruz about Colin Allred from now through the end, be my guess.
Now, speaking of villains, and I know we got to wrap up soon, but we can't not talk about Ken Paxton and the stuff that I've been reading about him and his wife here recently, especially that Texas Observer piece that I'm halfway through. It's like a crime novel. I mean, how do these people get away with this stuff? And I know there's all kinds of, when you've got money, you're able to skirt our judicial system, but, that's what I love about this country, right? My parents came from Mexico in a place where, they just sweep stuff under the rug if you have enough money. But here it seems like eventually the truth comes out and people end up having to pay for their deeds. Sounds biblical in a way, but it happens. What can you share with our audience about Ken Paxton that maybe the average? I know he's probably on Trump's short list for AG, which is frightening.
Yep.
And but you want to give your 1 minute, 2 minute version of who Ken Paxton is and why he's always in the papers.
It sounds flippant, or it just sounds like just political name story swapping, but Ken Paxton is a straight up criminal elected official. I mean, from the time when he was in the state house, he was swindling even his colleagues. One of the first crimes that he committed was that he set up a deal to sell shares in a speculative adventure. And so he got his colleagues to buy into it. And he said he was buying into it too, never letting them know that he was also getting a share for every body he suckered into making that sale. He ultimately got indicted by that, and he was indicted for it for several years, but then got off because of he got it moved into basically a civil court, and was able to get by with ultimately community service. But he is literally a confirmed criminal. Now, there's also a fun thing, and this is also true. We have the videotape of this. But tells you his character. He was going through a metal detector like you go through when you're going into a courthouse, and you have the bins and everything. Well, one of the bins ahead of him, somebody had left a Mont Blanc pen in it, and so he picks up this pen. He looks at it. He looks over at the guard, and then he puts it in his pocket and walks away with it.
Birds of a feather.
Pilfered a pen. But it's frustrating to me because we've been calling out at the Lone Star Project. We've been calling out Ken Paxton from the first day that he announced for Attorney General. The megaphone really never got turned to the voters by the press and by the media, and Republicans shielded him. They were afraid because he has a base within the religious and evangelical Republican community, and that's really sheltered him. I think now he probably has kind of reached that critical point in which there is general understanding that he's corrupt by voters. I think that if he doesn't get some type of appointment, and hopefully he doesn't, because Trump won't be president. But if Trump is president, I think he does. I think he gets a pardon for any crimes he might have committed, and I think they move him. But other than that, though, I think he's the most vulnerable Republican in 2026 in Texas. And people in 2018, we talk a lot about Beto almost winning. Actually, Paxton came closer to losing than Cruz did in 2018, and so it's one of my goals is to for Ken Paxton to no longer be in office after 2026.
Well, on that note, Matt, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you? Your Lone Star Project website, and for folks who want to get more involved or perhaps contribute to your cause and in any way.
Well, Albert, thank you. If you want to know the damage that Republicans are doing at the local level and the statewide level, go to LoneStarProject.net. And if you want to keep up on a day-to-day basis, sign up for our daily news clips and commentary. And if you want to really make a difference that will change the country, please contribute to the Lone Star Project, because every dime that we raise from this point on will be put directly into voter contact in the key counties of either Tarrant County or Dallas County. Excuse me, or Tarrant County or Harris County, excuse me.
Yeah, I hope a 20th anniversary party is in the works where we can raise money for the Lone Star Project, because I think that timing is going to be impeccable. I think 2026 is just going to be huge for us in Texas. I really believe it. The numbers are in our favor, but we need everyone's support, obviously, to make that happen. And look forward to having another conversation.
Thinking ahead and look out for that, particularly around if we have an inauguration to celebrate, you may see a Lone Star Project celebration too. So.
There you go. All right. Thank you, Matt. We'll have this. We'll have you back on soon. I hope to talk about Texas.
All right. Thanks, Albert.
And friends, that's a wrap for this week's version of the TargetSmart podcast. I'm your host, Albert Morales. Don't forget to follow us on all the various apps where you get your podcasts, whether it's on Pandora, Amazon, you name it, we're everywhere. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube as well. We'll see you next week with our guest, Amy Chapman. She is the political operative of political operatives in the great state of Michigan. She's got a lot to share with us, giving us a sort of a bird's eye view of the state of play in Michigan. Looking forward to that. So until next week, we'll see you.